Because, as we just indicated, the US and the UK have inked a tariff agreement that will result in cheaper prices for some products in both nations. A simple pen stroke and signature marked the beginning of a choice that fundamentally altered the course of transatlantic trade and may have ended one of the strongest economic partnerships in contemporary history. President Donald Trump imposed further steel tariffs on the European Union on June 1st, 50%, not 25%. He is discussing the deal between US Steel and Nippon Steel that he is announcing today. Nevertheless, he just announced that the current 25% steel tariffs would be increased. The president said those will now be tripling. I want to bring up the recent spike in industrial and automobile imports, which shocked Brussels, caught markets off guard, and sent shockwaves across the global aviation, energy, and logistics industries. The reaction was swift and severe within 48 hours. That was the end of a $43 billion Boeing deal with the European Union. In the event that present trade negotiations with the US break down, the European Union is already getting ready to impose duties on around 1,200 Boeing aircraft. To help us defeat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support, please hit the like button before we commence. No bargaining, no warning. The big order of American-made aircraft was silently halted by Brussels. A decision that caused fear from Seattle to Washington and sent Boeing's shares tumbling. Additionally, European leaders delivered a silent but unwavering message behind closed doors. Europe will withdraw if the United States keeps using trade as a weapon. There was no bluff here. After Trump announced his tariffs, the European stock market lost more than $150 billion in value in just 72 hours. The financial, automotive, and aerospace industries were at the forefront of the collapse. However, it was only a correction. Shot, it was a warning. Boeing's worth fell even more as it dealt with issues like manufacturing delays, quality control, disputes, and eroding global trust. Over 6% was lost by the aerospace industry as a whole. Furthermore, nobody in Washington had a backup plan. The quiet was overwhelming. Boeing has long relied on its global reputation as a symbol of American industrial excellence, and not only as a manufacturer of aircraft. However, its foreign consumers were now searching elsewhere, and the repercussions might be irreversible. Please click the subscribe button to show your support for the channel before we proceed. The Financial Times and Reuters have reported that Ryanair, one of Boeing's biggest European customers, is currently seriously re-evaluating its $30 billion 737 MAX purchase. The $30 billion agreement between Ryanair and Boeing could be cancelled. Not due to budgetary constraints or technological difficulties, but rather to US tariffs. Shares of Airbus and Boeing skyrocketed, and executives in boardrooms in Brussels, Frankfurt and Paris asked the question that no one in Washington was ready to respond to. Are American supply networks still reliable? Because it ceases to be about the goods when trade policy suddenly changes and contracts are torn up by political theater. It begins as a matter of survival. China moved quickly as it watched the turmoil play out. Beijing's state-sponsored aerospace conglomerate, Comarmac, went into private talks with European purchasers. It was believed for years that Comarmac was unable to compete with Boeing or Airbus, a European swing away from American aircraft, which previously seemed inconceivable, is now a reality due to changes in politics. Even a small percentage of Boeing's customers switching allegiance may end U.S. dominance in aviation exports forever, and the consequences are already being felt. The European Union responded with a $95 billion retaliatory package within a few days. In the event that trade negotiations with Washington fail, the European Commission claims it is preparing a range of duties on U.S. goods valued at almost $95 billion. Products that could be targeted include automobiles, airplanes, and agricultural and industrial items. Levies that are specifically targeted against American commercial aircraft, cars, whiskey, wine, and industrial machinery. Nothing arbitrary. These bullseye eyes were picked to strike both blue and red states. Washington referred to it as defensive. It's symmetrical, according to Brussels. The EU then formally complained to the World Trading Organization, alleging that the US had escalated without consulting them, in violation of fundamental trading standards. However, even that was only one aspect of the reaction. Because of the retaliatory tariffs, a change occurred that might not be undone. Brussels started redrawing its trade map in a calm, calculated, and unobtrusive manner, while Washington doubled down on walls and tariffs, awaiting approval from Washington. Under the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, Canada is at the center of that pivot. Since 2022, commerce between Canada and the EU has increased by more than 70%. Additionally, recent estimates indicate that by 2026, it will reach $90 billion yearly. Why? Predictability, no unexpected tariffs, no political backlash, no retaliatory speeches in front of fighter jets. Simply contracts, clean standards, and calm dependability are all things that Canada gives that the United States no longer does. Where U.S. companies used to dominate, Canadian producers are increasingly taking their place. The trade flow that formerly went through Houston, Baltimore, and Chicago is now being absorbed by Ottawa. From agricultural exports to aerospace components, economic chess is not what this is. Washington is no longer engaged in this long-term game. According to Boeing's own admission, 80% of the commercial aircraft it ships are delivered to customers in other countries, and 80% of the material within those aircraft is produced in U.S. factories. Put differently, Boeing is more than just a business. It is a global manufacturing artery for the United States. However, arteries can be cut. Europe is now constructing bypasses. Between Ottawa and Brussels, new investment is being made and corridors are being formed. Following the tariff battle, EU trade authorities started to emphasize "see more," not only as a convention but also as a model for the future of transatlantic commerce. Climate-aligned, modernized, and shielded from American volatility. Now, agreements are being made in the United Arab Emirates, India, and Africa, are loosely based on the Canadian framework, which is founded on energy cooperation, mutual infrastructure development, and regulatory concord rather than supremacy. The pivot in finance is also not slower. Bloomberg reports that EU foreign investment in Canada's clean technology industry increased 41% in the past year. In Alberta and Quebec, more than $1.2 billion has been invested directly in green infrastructure and hydrogen initiatives. These are agreements that the United States would have made 2 years ago. Washington's exclusion now stems from a loss of predictability rather than a decline in skills. Europe now views what it once considered an ally as a danger. Access is no longer a factor in trade nowadays. Stability, climate ambition, regulatory alignment, and most importantly, coherence, the capacity to reach an agreement without political sabotage in the upcoming election cycle, all important. In that regard, Canada is winning, since the harm is already done, regardless of whether Trump reverses course or the White House negotiates a ceasefire or lowers tariffs to 25%. This is the volume of trucks leaving Los Angeles. Please review the chart. Today's statistics are on par with or less than the highest holiday traffic. And we're not celebrating the holidays. A spike is not what this is. It's a collapse. A sign from the world economy that freight traffic is being diverted from U.S. ports due to uncertainty. Deals are no longer the focus of the trade war. Europe is not merely responding. It is about divorce. FutureEP is proofing. We are currently witnessing the silent breakdown of the post-World War II Western trade consensus. The foundation that brought the U.S., Canada, and Europe together under a common ideal of free markets, uniform standards, and stable government is disintegrating. Furthermore, nobody is halting it. At the heart of this disintegration is the Comprehensive Trade Agreement, CTA, which was formerly viewed as a side project but is now the cornerstone of Europe's post-American trade strategy. Ports in Canada are growing, and customs systems are being updated to comply with EU regulations. Climate-related infrastructure is growing faster. Regulatory alignment is strengthening, and agricultural coordination is growing. The EU's labor, environmental, and digital policies are being quickly adopted by Canada. Additionally, it is absorbing the trust and investment capital that previously passed through Washington in the process. The United States is watching from a distance as what was once a nice-to-have trade deal turns into Europe's escape route. Although the stats show a slaughter, the Trump administration portrayed the trade war as a defensive tactic that would safeguard American industry, increase domestic output, and punish trade violators. The U.S. trade deficit in early 2025 reached a record-breaking $140 billion, the highest quarterly difference ever recorded, according to the Tax Foundation, and powers shift, that isn't defense, exposure, that is, the manufacturing reshoring that was promised, has not taken place. Rather, U.S. firms are losing foreign customers, paying more for parts, and experiencing declining profitability. Supply networks around the world are not being repatriated. They are being diverted, and after they leave, they hardly ever return. These are structural changes rather than transient oscillations. Europe is changing the trading map so that America is no longer the default, while Washington waves flags and yells about sovereignty. Rather, it comprises countries that are seen as stable, rule-based, and strategically aligned, such as Canada, Japan, and India. Additionally, the United States is being forced out of the system it helped create for the first time in the post-war era. Tariffs are not the only issue here. It concerns the termination of the United States' monopoly on Western trade governance. Furthermore, the repercussions extend well beyond the figures because you are not alone when you lose trust and your supporters begin putting in place effective systems around you. You don't matter. Europe is also moving on, even as U.S. lawmakers argue about whether the tariffs were too severe or not. The parallel frameworks are being launched. Ports in Portugal and pipelines in Spain are being modernized. It is incorporating EU norms into trade agreements with Chile, Indonesia, and Kenya. At its core, Canada serves as a bridge between Europe and Asia, a new geostrategic anchor in a world where Washington no longer sets the rules, rather than as a junior partner, and that's the real risk. Witnessing is quiet because of the transformation we are in. For cable news, it is not designed. No videos of yelling matches at the WTO have gone viral. No significant reversals occur. A trade war is not what this is. It's a replacement. The European Union has started to gradually wean itself off of its reliance on the United States in less than a year, with choices instead of conflict. New rules, new partners, new passageways. Boeing, the jewel in the crown of American aerospace, is now discovering that the hard way, it's only about losing a contract, nothing more. It has to do with the erosion of trust, and every transaction turns like a gamble once trust is lost. Trump might continue to think of tariffs as leverage. However, they serve as a signal to the rest of the world, a warning that America is not trustworthy to keep its end of the bargain, and that the next election could change the rules. Threats and conditions accompany that exchange with Washington. Europe has no intention of waiting to see what will happen next. Something else is already being built. And whether the United States can regain the commerce it just lost is not the question. At hand,